Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Maqbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories. The first is going to be Pakistan's fight against terrorism and, of course, what has been happening in the country for quite some time now. This is something that has been put forward as a very strong resolve by both the Prime Minister, of course, the government and the military installations as well, who have reiterated time and again that there is absolutely no room for any such activities within the country. We, of course, also had the Corps Commanders Conference that was held today, and this was again reiterated in terms of the security and law and order situation of the country. Important aspect in this, of course, in terms of digital terrorism, is something also that the government and the military installations seek to build against and, of course, develop a mechanism moving forward. It is important, of course, also to note that in light of what has been going on, particularly in the provinces of KP and Balochistan, and we've seen a series of attacks, particularly at the end of last month, and we've also seen that Akhtar Mengal has also put forward his own resignation in light of what has been going on in Balochistan, talking about how he can no longer represent the province and whatever is happening in the province compels him to resign from his capacity, and he hopes the province to prosper. So we're also going to be taking a look at what this means in terms of the political leadership and the impact that that creates and the way that we want to put forward our actions in order to making sure that there is the kind of preventive measures also taken on ground in terms of development and prosperity of a particular area of the country. So we're going to be understanding what it means in terms of the various aspects of moving forward against the fight against terrorism, and of course bringing everybody under the umbrella of Pakistan and making sure that there are no anti-state elements that remain. So we're going to be taking a look at that in our first segment of the show today. Our next one is going to take a look at another big issue, which is of course the economy of Pakistan, something that the country again has been dealing with for quite some time now. The Prime Minister today, addressing the federal cabinet, has also spoken about how the way that we want to move forward with the IMF is the priority of the country, and the ministry is working day and night to making sure that this is something that is approved by the IMF's executive board as well, with of course these statements coming in from the finance minister as well, reiterating the fact that this will be taken up by the board and that Pakistan is fully on track in making sure that its bilateral assurances are also met, debt rollovers are of course processed too, and then moving forward the economic reform measures that need to be taken at home, including increasing the tax net, is something that his ministry and the government officials are able to achieve. So we're going to be taking a look at that at the end of the show today. For this and more, as always, I've been joined in the studios by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi and Faisal, and we've also been joined online for our first segment by Brigadier Retired Mr. Waqar Khan and Dr. Niaz Murtaza, senior analyst. Thank you very much for joining us and being a part of the discussion. And Brigadier Waqar, I'm going to start with you with reference to what has been discussed today, particularly when we talk about Pakistan's fight against terrorism and of course the way that we have seen that sort of resolve coming forward. But I want your take particularly in terms of what we see happening in certain provinces of the area as well, particularly of course KP and Balochistan. And we've seen that of course unfortunately these areas have been the target of these terrorist activities for quite some time now. We've seen a spate of terror attacks happen at the end of last month in Balochistan. We've seen political leadership in Balochistan also resigning from the National Assembly, claiming that the situation is very, very dire. So I want your take in terms of what the overall response the country is putting forward as part of Azm Istikam, as part of our fight against terrorism, and as part of making sure that there is that political engagement also present when we talk about such provinces. Waqar, you'll have to unmute yourself. We are unable to hear you. Yes, go ahead. Yes, go ahead. Brigadier Waqar, can you hear me? Right. Unfortunately, we are unable to hear you, but we're going to be trying and connecting once again. But Dr. Niaz, I'm going to come to you with the same question, particularly when we talk about an overall comprehensive strategy against terrorism. While we, of course, have the military preparedness and we have actions and sacrifices that our soldiers and security personnel are giving time and again. But in terms of an overall comprehensive strategy that engages the elements that need to be engaged prior to any such activities as well, and to making sure that we have that consolidation of all the provinces in the country. Do you think that's part of the plan moving forward as part of Azma Istikam, as part of our fight against terrorism?
Well, yes, there is terrorism in both KP and Balochistan, as you mentioned, but then, the nature of terrorism is very different. In KP, it's an extremist organization which has its own, very warped vision of Islam that it wants to impose on the rest of the country. So both its means as well as its ends are very, very dubious. And with this kind of a group, there cannot be any scope for, negotiations, talk. And I think Pakistan has taken a good stance on this issue. There is a lot of pressure from different quarters to, try to, have some kind of a negotiation with TTP, certainly from Afghanistan, even from, some quarters within Pakistan. But I think what we have right now is the right approach. No negotiations, unless, of course, TTP wants to, just surrender completely. Then we can have some negotiations on the terms of, the surrender. Now, Balochistan obviously is very different. It's not, a religiously inspired issue out there. It's rooted in, decades of deprivation, as we all know. Balochistan is our poorest, province, even though it has rich minerals, it has ports, but still somehow all that hasn't translated into prosperity for the people of Balochistan, especially for the people in the Baloch areas. There is a lot of resentment, and unfortunately, some groups have adopted the wrong way of dealing with that deprivation. You do see a lot of other Baloch groups which are actively trying to, participate in politics, engage in peaceful protest, like the Baloch Yakjahati Committee. And then you have, the terrorist groups, and what we saw a few days back in Balochistan with, uh, over 2 dozen, laborers from Punjab killed in cold blood. So, whatever the deprivations, there is no justification for killing innocent people. But still recognizing that there is an element of deprivation as well, which is rooted in, state neglect. We have to, adopt a slightly different approach there, reach out to, the people who are still within the political mainstream. And there, there is, a person that what you were mentioning, Sardar Mingle, he has a very critical role because he's one of the leading Baloch nationalists who has been, participating for decades in politics, and it's very important for the state to engage with him and try to make sure that he stays within mainstream politics, because if he withdraws from mainstream politics, then the connection between mainstream politics and the Baloch population will become weaker and weaker. There is all this, issues of, how representative the governments in Balochistan have been over the years, including even now. And, you've had periods where, the nationalists were leading, and you did see a downtick in, terrorism, then some attempt to, have negotiation. So I think what we need to do is, first of all, understand the root causes of terrorism in each area, and then develop, strategies accordingly with that. And again, even in KP, you don't need, the huge kind of, operations that we had after 2014-15, because at that time, the whole of Swat, 2009 onwards, the whole of Swat, and then big chunks of, ex-FATA were completely under the control of terrorists. So you did have to have a large-scale operation then. Now they don't really hold large-scale territory. So what you really need is, more intelligence-based operations and smaller operations which don't disturb the local population, because there was huge, displacement, disappearances from 2009 onwards. So it requires a very, smart kind of strategy, and we hope that Mr. Kam is able to bring all these different threats together and come up with a strategy which deals with each terrorism on its own merits.
Right, absolutely. Brigadier Waqar, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Great, we can hear you as well. So, Brigadier Waqar, I'd like your perspective on this as well, particularly in terms of the strategies that have been discussed, and Dr. Niaz also mentioned in terms of political reconciliation as well on ground, as well as, of course, what we want to achieve in terms of the intelligence-based operations and the kind of alignment that perhaps we need in different areas and different departments and different groups of people, including, of course, the first responders on ground, and then, of course, those who form the strategy, and of course government officials as well. And so I want your take on whether or not there is work that needs to be done on that front, that is being done on that front, particularly after what we've seen happen in Balochistan recently.
I think I'll first focus on Balochistan and the issue of representation. I'm sure they have an assembly and they have senators returning from Balochistan after Mangal Sahib himself have been a part of the process, and he has held very senior positions in Balochistan. And incidentally, some of his relatives are now appearing on Indian media to basically, I would say, peddle the cause of so-called, liberation of Balochistan. Very, very unfortunate. And he's probably, I think, playing to the gallery. Otherwise, he's been part of the mainstream. Maybe is to mainly, draw a certain concession. The other is that in terms of development, I think there's been unprecedented, right from President Zardari's program for Balochistan, for mainstreaming, opening of, I think CPEC's one of the major, I would say, initiative of connecting Balochistan, the rest of the country in Karachi has been through CPEC. And now we're looking at CPEC 2. Same is true in, I think, KP, a lot of area has been opened. And we've just seen the resurgence of, the terrorist group. We have to look at the objectives and the timing. It's very important. I think this was highlighted by political military leadership. One is launching of CPEC 2, which is definitely for the Baloch people. And that is, of course, Recordec mine is going to, inshallah, start production in 2027. And this is for the Baloch people, it's for the youth. Most of the youth is definitely with Pakistan. It's just, I think, maximum 2,000 militant cadres. Definitely their perception, I would say, they have been able to build up the terrorist proxies which are operating from overseas, let's say Afghanistan, at time from Iran, and even supported by, like Majid Brigade has all the support coming from Research and Analysis Wing. And what is the target? Target is one CPEC 2. Target is development of Balochistan. Target is basically depriving the Baloch youth from getting jobs and getting into mainstream. And then, of course, as mentioned, that there's a huge conference coming up, the SCO's summit, which Pakistan is going to host, and it's going to be a big event. And somehow those, and if you now compare it, what is happening in Myanmar, because there was a China-Myanmar, economic corridor also, which is being subjected to civil war. So if you look at both shoulders of India, these two avenues, basically for connectivity of Eurasia as a whole, are under pressure. So I would say that there is something more than just the issue of deprivation. I've been in Balochistan for, I think, 4 terms in my military term. My last term was there as a brigadier ops. And I've seen it quite closely that by and large the youth is with Pakistan, Baloch people are with Pakistan. Just that militant group which would try to develop a perception. Like Marang Baloch went to Norway, she comes back. Before that, she had around in Islamabad, a lot of, I think, liberals supported her. And now we have basically missing persons being found in terrorist outfits. So it's very, very unfortunate, those who peddle her cause. Yes, there have been, I'm not saying it, but I think it's the responsibility, collective responsibility of political military leadership to steer Pakistan. For KP, I think it's already there. The intelligence-based operations are going to continue. I've been in Swat, I think, 3 weeks back, and people are not only very happy, they would, like to see the backside of Taliban coming back, because the tourism, their industry, their agriculture was badly affected. And we've seen, where there were hotbeds. So people of KP would not like to see the return of Taliban. Again, there is an effort by, I would say, people across the border or the regime to draw certain concessions that we have discussed using terrorism as a tool. Inshallah, they will not succeed. Mainly, we have to focus on, I think, those areas which need development. And the new initiative should actually benefit. So they should become, like Recordec should have, main stakeholders should be the Baloch people. And even look at demography and areas of focus. I think you have almost 42% Pashtuns in Balochistan. Then you have Brahmis, which are again 22%, 24% Baloch. And then you have Makranis. And within that, there are few tribes, and there are hardly 2,000 militants. So inshallah, they'll be sorted out. All the state has also offered, like if you look at Guzar Mam Shambe, or Safad Bangal, they surrendered, I think, this year, early this year. They were since they wanted to join the mainstream, they were accommodated by the state. So our call to the people in the hills is, if they have any grievances, they can come and join political mainstream and become part of development of Balochistan.
Right, absolutely. And while I understand that, Faisal, in terms of what is being offered and what spaces are allowed, why is there still then the problem of representation or a problem of voices being heard or not that is being quoted from different groups within Balochistan, even political leaders, even Mr. Akhtar Mengal himself? So I want your take in terms of why this discrepancy is there. Is it a matter of perception? Is it a matter of reality? Is it something that we need to be able to reevaluate and work on? And is that something that can possibly or is already being exploited by those elements that of course want to damage the country?
Yes, and obviously when we look at Balochistan situation, and I would agree with Brigadier Waqar when he says that of course the number of Baloch tribes, they are lesser in number, but still they are very influential when it comes to within the Baloch ranks, and the land is covered by them. Of course there are different tribes and every tribe has their chiefs of their tribes, like Mengal tribe, like many of the Bukti tribes or many other tribes. And of course when it comes to people like Akhtar Mengal, I mean they are the tribal leaders, their own tribes leaders, and of course they have of course their tribe under them. And when it comes to political fabric of Balochistan, of course it is consisting on different tribes. Of course they time to time they keep on getting power, and a few of them they come to center, and few of them they of course stay within the province itself. And still all of these tribes, they have been taking the power share, and still they are having in the same in this setup as well. But it is entirely up to whether somebody is provided with the maximum share or not. It is all about who's getting what share, and whoever's getting the minimum share, of course we will see him talking on the media, talking around, and of course minging about it all the time. If one party is getting the maximum share, the other party would start doing the same. And this has been happening. And when it comes to people of Balochistan, people at large, I'm not talking about the tribal leaders. Of course leaders are all happy in terms of whatever the shares they're getting and the wealth they are making from there. But when it comes to people at large, no significant works they were carried out by these tribal leaders for their own people, and of course they are the ones who suffer a lot. And now we know that since army is there, army is making sure that the schools are of course restarted. There were many schools who were just in the papers, and their own ground there was no representation, not even teachers there. But now of course it is being made possible by the military leadership that all of these things they can be looked after. So people at large, they are getting benefit out of it. And when it comes to of course different industries like minerals, exploration of minerals and all, this work has to be done. Of course it is not only beneficial for Balochistan, but of course for whole Pakistan. And I know that federal is of course interested in it, and same is the case with the provincial government as well. But when it comes to once again who gets what share, this is where the whole problem starts. And I think once for all they need to be set together by the establishment itself, and it needs to be sorted out, because this is not the sort of way to go along with the things, that if one tribe is being getting the maximum power in the province, then the other one would start blaming not only the opponents, but of course the establishment as well.
Absolutely,
but
I
now
understand.
of course politically this needs to be looked into, and of course all of the matters, they need to be settled. But I would fully agree with Brigadier Waqar when he says that it is only 1,500 to 2,000 armed sort of terrorists that are working there, and time and again like people like Majid Brigade, and there are so many evidences about these people to be trained in India. And people like Kulbhushan Jadhav and many more, they have been, of course, in touch with them, providing them with the arms, and the latest arms which were, of course, recovered from within Afghanistan, of course, the American arms I'm talking about. Now they are being handed over to these people, and of course, behind this, it's RAW. RAW knows that as long as they can ignite something in Balochistan, of course, the world would not be looking towards Kashmir. But of course, Kashmir is entirely a different issue. Only 2,000 maximum, the number I'm talking about, only 2,000, which is, of course, being propagated by, of course, the Indians, and RAW is investing on them, facilitating them, financing them. And this terrorism, of course, is there, that needs to be countered. And as Chief of the Army Staff himself said, the people on ground, of course, they have to join hands with the security forces to, of course, eliminate all of these dirty, rotten eggs from within the society.
Right, and I want to focus on this a bit more in terms of the situation that you described in Balochistan, and I want your take on this, Farrukh, in terms of how exactly is the situation being dealt with now and how it was dealt with previously. And this isn't something new that we're, of course, engaging with, something we've heard repeatedly over the years. And so why is it that it hasn't been addressed before, hasn't been successfully addressed before? And also in terms of, if we really want to focus on where the problem is emanating from, I understand all the elements that currently are in play, but where is the problem emanating from? Is it within or outside of Pakistan, and where to look to fix it?
Right. Sarah, thank you very much. Before I actually approach that question, I just want to do something that I rarely do, and that is to establish my bona fides on a topic of Balochistan. While you were talking about other tribes like Bugti and Mingals, right, which are bigger tribes, this last name that appears under my name, if you focus on that, that is also tribe of Baloch, sub-tribe of Baloch. And so by virtue of that, I also carry a titular title of Sardar with my name that is registered on my birth. I don't use it because I don't believe in Sardaris. But my humble submission is that this weaponization of grievance politics is amazing, right? Because there seems to be a characteristic lack of imagination on the part of the state of Pakistan. I think that for a long time period, we have been actually trying to bring peace to Balochistan, and that has been the biggest problem. The terrain is such, and because we haven't been able to build state infrastructure throughout the province, it is 50%, almost, actually 44% of Pakistan's territory. And if you add the coastal belt, especially the expanse, then it goes beyond 51%, right? So with that kind of an expanse and sparse population, the biggest problem is how do you connect all the cities and how do you provide the kind of amenities that are needed. And that is one place where we have been failing, and we haven't been successful even now when all the forces are trying to develop as much infrastructure as possible. But apart from that, there are other concerns as well. For example, I just mentioned Sardar, which would mean tribal elder, and which was mentioned also. The biggest problem with Balochistan has been this, tribal structure that has been there, and somehow the state of Pakistan has not been able to disrupt it. Remember that other countries, the moment they got freedom, they went for renegotiating the land tenure system. They went for land reforms of some sort, and because of that, nobody had the kind of large holdings. It has killed us in two places, not only in Balochistan. It has also done damage in two other places, Sindh also, and in southern Punjab, where the poor were somehow removed from the development processes, right? Because what happens with all these big names, the tribal elders, they form a creamy layer which actually filters everything and takes all the nourishment from the system. For example, I remember Zardari Sahab, when last time he was president, he announced Aghaaz Haqooq-e Balochistan package, which was to the tune of 12 billion rupees. And at that time, 1 rupee meant more than what it means now. And yet what happened was that after a few years, I was in Balochistan, I was traveling across the province, and I was astonished that I couldn't see it. I couldn't see the development. And when we came back and we checked the books, the money had been sent to Balochistan. So where did it go? It usually goes in the deep pockets of these very sardars. And that means that those people on ground don't get that nourishment that is needed. Now the state should have found a way, because we have been fighting, to bring peace in the province throughout its age, throughout Pakistan's age, at least should have done the right thing and done away with the whole land tenure system, so that all these elements don't actually monopolize things. Now the problem is all these BLA, BLF, BLO, whatever, all these elements actually come from which cadre? They come from the tribal cadres, and usually they are, in the past at least, influenced by some tribal elder. But the problem is there are other places where perhaps there is less of a tribal and more populist kind of movement as well. But the problem is that these people then give birth to so-called pacifist movements. And as was pointed out by Brigadier Saab, was pointed out by many others, the problem with us is that we wear our hearts on sleeves. If you look at, and we immediately start actually associating with certain people, and we think that they have the right idea. If the system is broken, if the system is wrong, every voice that is coming out of that system has to be seen with suspicion. But remember that when I was covering war and terror, and I had traveled in the ex-FATA region and then Khyber Pakhtunkhwa's underdeveloped areas, what actually struck to me was how comfortably the state was communicating with the people through radio stations. I haven't seen the similar kind of push in Balochistan. So what happens? You have left such a big expanse, and people with deep wounds, they might be self-inflicted, but you haven't been able to communicate with them. So what I suggest is not dialogue per se, peace talks or stuff like that. A national dialogue is needed, Sana, because elsewhere also people are hurting, and what will happen is without that dialogue, and that has to be modeled after, not the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission's example, because it did not do much in deflating anger or pain. You'll have to go to the Canadian model, where because of their school systems at the start, colonial school systems, there was a lot of massive pain. And that was diffused because there was this structure. So in Pakistan, you have to have a dialogue, but please don't start counting good people or bad people, because then you're lost, because Balochistan is a complicated place, and because the wounds are so deep, you will be lost in trying to defend one side against the other.
Right, absolutely. There are two things that I want to talk about, and Dr. Niaz, I'll start with you first in terms of digital terrorism, something of course that has been mentioned quite a few times recently, and it seems that actions have also been taken in this regard. And even in the Corps Commanders Conference today, there was mention of making sure that there is cybersecurity and that all measures are in place for that. We've seen that there was an announcement coming in from the National Assembly and the Cabinet with regards to a web monitoring system also to control online content. And I want your take on what that means in terms of how we will be fighting digital terrorism, what sort of accountability measures are going to be taken in this regard, and how it will impact the local population, and how will that balance be created in terms of allowing that space for expression and opinion to float, and also to protect people from digital terrorism.
Yeah, I tried to do a few searches on this term digital terrorism to see, whether it has any specific meaning, in the global literature. All I could find was, Pakistani references to this term, digital terrorism. There is the term cyber terrorism, which means that, you use online tools to try to, engage in terrorism and the physical aspect of it, you try to do that through online means. That is well defined and recognized. But digital terrorism, the way Pakistan is defining it, it means that anybody who's on social media and has critical remarks about any part of the state, whether the security establishment, whether the government, that in Pakistan gets defined as a digital terrorism, and we are putting all kind of firewalls in place which has slowed down internet so much. So I think again we need to have a very clear definition of terrorism. Even our standard definition of terrorism is extremely broad. Terrorism is what TTP does. It sits in its offices, in its mountains, and plans on how to kill innocent civilians through suicide attacks. That's the most clear example of terrorism. But if somebody is criticizing our politics or our security policies, that is not terrorism. And trying to shut down dissent through putting firewalls, etc., I think that is counterproductive. So I think we should desist from that and really focus on the real forms of terrorism. On the other hand, you hear from KP that at night all parts of Dera Ismail Khan, Tank, there is no presence of security from Pakistani side, and the streets are being policed by TTP. So why aren't we able to put energy and try to control that kind of a thing instead of inventing something new as digital terrorism? So I think again we need to be careful that we don't misinterpret dissent and difference of opinion as terrorism and try to go against that bogey while we ignore concrete manifestations of terrorism that you see in various parts of KP right now.
Absolutely. Brigadier Waqar, I want your perspective, and you can add with regards to digital terrorism as well, but I want your perspective in terms of accountability and accountability across the board. Again, something mentioned in the Corps Commanders Conference today, and this is also something, of course, that is being carried out within the military installations as well, within the army ranks as well. And of course, while that may be welcoming to see, I want your take in terms of how to ensure that there is true accountability, both within and outside of these military institutions, also in terms of those that have contributed to the state of affairs that we have today in terms of terrorism and our fight against it. What sort of actions then are required to be taken that perhaps might have been delayed for a while or haven't really seen meet their end?
Yeah, I think I would just like to address the aspect of digital terrorism, how other nations define it. There was the term used as, hybrid war, fifth generation war. There was a lot of joke made by some of the intellectuals that doesn't exist. Because there may be something coined by the Pakistan establishment. There are, I think, 1,000 books written on hybrid war and fifth generation warfare. And maybe if you search Google, you'll find, I think, 500,000 articles on that. So it's not. Now, if you look at UK, I'll just give an example for Professor Saab, that you have UK's Prime Minister now calling these guys digital thugs. He said thuggery will be. So it's the way you define it. And one tweet, which they traced it out, the media read all the way to Lahore, to arrest, one guy, and he was handed over to the FIA. And they think that it was triggered by one. So if you start weaponizing the social media, then I think it becomes dangerous. Like 9th May, you may agree or may not agree. If you have daily, doses of negativism about Pakistan, about the, let's say, people who are fighting terrorism and try to undermine the chain of command. Look at what happened to, people who assaulted Capitol Hill. They were never, I think, prodded by something or with a stick. It was basically through social media. If you know that Telegram chief is, been arrested in Paris for no reason, that basically Telegram allows, lakhs of people to form a group. Although there are political reasons, because they've not banned X, which was selling, let's say, weapons by the Houthis on online. But they've targeted because somehow it was some of the groups were towing the Russian line. So it's now go to, I would request Professor to please go to India and see how social media laws are. It's very interesting. Please Google it. From 2018 to 2019, they brought very, very harsh social media laws. They can stop me on the street, and there are 12 agencies, and you can have I think 13 agencies from Raw down to Delhi Police and Special Branch, who are allowed to stop you, take out your mobile or laptop, draw the data, and arrest you for 1 year, and then you'll be charged later on. So this is because they feel, like in Manipur, a lot of, I think, atrocities or fighting between Kukis and Metis took place because of social media. So it has become a universal problem. Just ask, British Prime Minister why he's calling these guys digital thugs. Okay, somebody in Pakistan may call it digital terrorists, but when you start, I think, weaponizing the information, and it's very convenient that you can pass on, or maybe at times there is, blasphemous content which can create very, very, I think, I would say dangerous situation. Something on social media, we've seen lynching of people taking place in India. I think yesterday they lynched an old man of, I think, 80 years just because of suspicion. This was passed on social media. So I think it is in that perspective that we are looking at. Pakistan is already facing terrorism. Just imagine how the BLA runs the social media, how Marang Gloat was projected. And we have found people who are missing in her cardinals, and then they are found, doing suicide attacks. So I think it's not very simple. You go to any state, you go to Iran, try to tweet against Iran. Just go to Iran, try to tweet. You go to Russia, go to Middle East, they have, I think, arrested Bengalis, and now today they have released because they don't want chaos, even on social media. But maybe you can say that these are non-democratic states. But US, Canada, you have a cyber police in France. I was there in a seminar in Paris, which is, I think, 40,000 guys are just looking at what you do on social media because they still feel that there can be chaos. We've seen Trumpsters doing it on Capitol Hill. UK is now worried. They are bringing in more laws. So I think social media is something has become a joke now. UK law is very simple. If you can't abuse anybody on the street, you can't do it on social media. I think that is very, very simple. So maybe we have to bring, I think, some laws.
Right, Brigadier Waqar, regarding accountability within and outside of military institutions, and then Faisal, we can come to you later.
Yeah, I think that is again very important that in case, because I think in Core Commander's conference it was reiterated, because we had a very high profile case, that in case you are part of a disciplined force, and it's not allowed anywhere. You go to India, you go to US, if you are not, let's say, following the chain of command, it can be very, very dangerous. Now we have also, I think, in bureaucrats, we've been asked civil servants to avoid, putting things on social media, because when you're serving the state, you follow the rules. So I think military cannot afford it, and that's why it was reiterated that there will be no compromise on the internal accountability, and the process would continue. And we know there's a high-profile case, and maybe there are people who are connected. So state has to put its foot down. Otherwise, God forbid, if the chain of command breaks, which I think was tried on 9th, if you go into that, I was the first one to comment on 9th live that this was an attack on the chain of command. There were calls from US senators, they called from London, North America, live telecasts, attack this and that place. It can't function, in any, I think, I would say, Muhazzab society. So all the more reason that we need to strengthen our laws, and I'm sure Pakistan military has followed a good system of chain of command, and that is how it is, I think, been able to deliver. So inshallah, things would be better.
Thank you very much, Brigadier Waqar, and thank you, Dr. Niaz, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Yes, Faisal.
Yes, and I just wanted to add in whatever Brigadier Waqar said, and that was related to, of course, even India. They have very strict rules, and of course, I'm someone who since 2022. I'm banned in India, I'm withheld in India. If somebody wants to open my social media accounts in India, they will not be able to do it. So this shows that since almost more than 2 years, they have been doing it in their own country.
Right, absolutely. And Farrukh, you wanted to add something to that as well, but I'm also going to pose the next segment's question since we're short on time. So please do comment on what the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister have also stated in terms of our commitment and the efforts that we're making to making sure that Pakistan is on the right track, both with for the IMF and, of course, with economic reforms at home.
Now, you expect me to actually merge the previous question's answer with this one.
Yes.
I don't think I will be able to do that. Sarah, let us talk about economics then.
Okay.
Because I earlier just wanted to do a favor to the audience. I wanted to read the title of a book that was written in 2007, and it was called Digital Crime and Digital Terrorism. So we haven't invented the term. English language is an old language, and we can arrogate this role of inventors to ourselves, but it is not so. Anyways, regarding economics, let me actually talk about various dynamics that the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister actually spoke about. Of course, it is quite clear that Pakistan, after having the cover for imports for two months, has acquired some measure of macroeconomic stability, and that is good for our situation. But the concern that was flagged by the finance minister, and I think that he is right in this, is that the burden of taxes is mostly going on salaried people and people who have already been taxed. If you don't increase the tax net, particularly wholesalers, because wholesalers are still refusing to be taxed, but because of that everybody suffers more. And then he also spoke about inflation and interest rate. Our interest rate is still very high, and that actually kills any possibility of creative investments. But then he also spoke about something which is very interesting, and which is regarding the overall state of affairs, that Pakistan's growth is import led. So what happens is that when we actually go for growth, we end up actually creating a situation where we immediately start suffering from balance of payments or current account deficit. So that's why the government of Pakistan has to actually take all these steps carefully. And regarding right sizing, he said, because there are people who are protesting in Islamabad, and he made a point which is quite welcome, that of course downsizing has to take place, but that downsizing will be done through a form and a format. It will not be a random decision, waving of wand and magically removing departments or people from those departments, or arbitrarily actually picking and choosing, but there would be some criteria and some kind of package to ensure that those people who retire or who are sent home at least do not starve or do not actually totally suffer in the end. So that is a welcome announcement. I hope the government finds a better way to communicate it to those who are protesting, because then I'm sure you and I will be at ease to travel, because everything is expensive. Fuel is also expensive.
Yeah.
And because of all these blockades, it becomes a nightmare to traverse through Islamabad when you are coming to work or taking your children to school or whatever you may have.
Absolutely, and that is of course something that is important, and we are putting our confidence in the ministry and in the government to making sure that we are moving in the right direction and we'll get the kind of positive impact that we're hoping for. Thank you, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, for always being part of the debate. That's all that we have from the show today. We'll now see you tomorrow.